Assalamu alaikum and hello. So, one of the things I've been thinking about is what does AI coding actually solve? I mean, if the purpose was to replace software engineers, then um, we can objectively say no, that's not going to happen. And if you rewind back to 2005 when vibe coding took off, back then, if you was to actually believe the marketing and the hype, it was almost as if, well, you don't need to be an engineer and you can write, or anybody can write software with the use of AI. But fast forward to now, and vibe coding is dead. No one takes vibe coding seriously, and now that's morphed, if you like, and the goalposts have shifted, and it's now called agentic coding. So, I mean, does that mean we're going to now eventually have these fully autonomous coding agents that don't require any human involvement? Well, no. Um, we humans or we engineers are firmly in the driving seat, and we have to essentially be there to guide. So it has to be guided AI essentially. Now, the idea or perhaps the nirvana that these AI companies want to reach is the eventual goal where humans aren't needed and these fully autonomous agents or AI agents can do all the work. But that could never actually happen. And the reason is three things would have to be solved. The first one, these models would have to have 0% hallucination. The second one, they would have to be fully deterministic. And the third one is that they would have to be generalized. They'd have to be able to generalize past their training data. Now, if you think about it, these three things are the complete opposite of what large language models are. Now, okay, so given that us engineers have to be at the driving seat, why would we actually use these tools? Because I guess the idea is that they're supposed to provide us with this increased productivity. But just as I said in my previous video, in terms of this, the code that it generates, all of this slop, we know, and especially now, there's a lot of paper out there, and we have the hard evidence about not just the bugs that it creates, but also the fact that it's insecure and has all these vulnerabilities, which essentially means when you use these tools, the more code that you generate, the more that has to be verified. So, okay, where would you use this? Where would you use these tools? Would you use it, for example, in the medical industry? Would you write medical software with this? Well, no, because the risks are, very bad. What could happen? I mean, the worst could happen is that people could die. So you probably would not want to use this in that area. Well, what about the financial industry? Well, you wouldn't want to write software that has bugs, especially when it comes to money, because people could lose money. Okay, what about software that runs on cars and planes and trains and those things? Well, that's also dangerous because if things go wrong, people could die, and a lot of people could die. Okay, so perhaps what about gaming? Well, if you have a lot of bugs in your games, it'll be very glitchy, and you'll start losing sales because who wants to buy a game that's glitchy? Okay, so what about personal software like on your phone or on your desktop? Well, if there's bugs and issues, you could end up, people losing their data or the data being leaked. Again, who'd want to have software like that? So, okay, it appears, whichever industry you look at, you know, this isn't really the kind of, it doesn't really provide the advantages. There seems to be quite a lot of risks, and you certainly wouldn't want to increase the risk. You do whatever you can to reduce the risk. So, of course, now having said that, there are certain areas where this kind of AI assisted tooling could be beneficial and really beneficial. And these are where you're creating, for example, a prototype, maybe a proof of concept, maybe you're doing a lot of research, or you're building essentially throwaway code that you don't really care about, but you're just exploring certain things. In that regard, agentic coding and AI coding, all this kind of stuff, is very useful, and you certainly would do it. But as I said, I think that those type of programming activities or engineering activities compared to the rest of the industry is actually it's a lot more niche. So you'd only use it in a very niche area. Okay, right. So as I mentioned, here's one real world example, and this is essentially the poster child of Anthropic. So Anthropic, which is the company behind Claude, and this, they made a big fanfare about this. And if you think about it, this is like the best case scenario because you have this code base which has thousands of tests, so it has a way of validating, the actual outcome of this. And it's targeting Rust, which has a very strict compiler and has very rich error reporting that comes off the back of it. So combined with these together, and also the fact that large language models excel at sort of doing mechanical translation from one language to another language, and it's got prior art because you have the actual existing code. So given all of those things, this rewrite using agentic coding should have been, as I mentioned, the absolute poster child. But if you squint and you look at the dates, for example, this actually they blogged about this in July, on last month in July, and now we're sort of mid-August, and it still hasn't been released. So something is very suspect. Now, I'm not saying then there may be other reasons we don't know, but it's very suspicious. It's more likely that they, at the moment, they have a lot of engineers probably cleaning up the mess that it has generated. And anyway, so coming back to the original question, what does it actually solve? As I said, there's very niche areas that you'd use agentic coding, um, you know, but other than outside of that niche area, what does it solve? Because it certainly doesn't solve productivity. You actually end up being actually slower, if anything, especially if given the risks that are involved in buggy, insecure software. Ultimately, it boils down to the ball. It boils down to trying to increase speed and reducing headcount. And the only people who have that in their interests are companies, essentially. Companies want to commoditize and reduce headcount. That's all it is. That's the only purpose, really. The idea, that's the dream. That is the dream that these AI companies are selling. Is that, look, a machine can do this, so therefore you can reduce your headcount. That's what it boils down. It's just an economic pipe dream that they are selling, and this is what all of these billions, if not trillions, of dollars of investment is hinging on this sort of pipe dream. But as I mentioned earlier, in order to realize that pipe dream, those three things are just not going to disappear. These are hard, cold mathematical facts, and until they're solved, which I don't think they can be solved, this is a pipe dream. And so yes, I think you can just relax. We humans, we're not going anywhere.